Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into some really interesting stuff from the Department of Defense. We've got our hands on some internal documents, plans, real behind-the-scenes stuff, and it looks like they're getting ready to completely overhaul their entire healthcare IT system.
Ambitious.
Yeah, ambitious is right. But think about it, a system so efficient, so user-friendly, it actually revolutionizes how healthcare data is used within the DoD.
I mean, that's a pretty tall order. What are we talking about here? What's the big idea?
Okay, so the key to all this is something called the DevMAC Reboot, and that's what we're going to unpack today.
DevMAC. Okay, I'm listening.
DevAM stands for Development Multiple Award Contract. Essentially, what they're trying to do is build a whole ecosystem of talented developers all working together to create cutting-edge healthcare IT solutions.
So instead of just buying software off the shelf, they're gonna, build it all in-house?
Not exactly in-house. It's more like they're creating this specialized app store. But for the DoD, they want to bring in a wide range of talent. Foster competition, encourage innovation, tap into a whole world of skill sets and perspectives that they wouldn't have access to otherwise.
That's an interesting approach, but we both know it's not just about throwing a bunch of developers at a problem. You need a real strategy, a vision for how this is all gonna work.
And that's where it gets really interesting. The documents we've got, they highlight this whole idea of transforming the entire culture of healthcare IT within the DoD. They're putting a big emphasis on user experience, design thinking, even rethinking the physical workspaces. They actually use terms like Workforce 3.0 and Workplace 3.x.
Okay, buzzwords aside, what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, they're talking about attracting and retaining top talent by creating a work environment that's agile, collaborative, empowers people to really contribute.
Right, so it's not just about the technology, it's about the people and the environment they work in.
Exactly. It's about building a more modern, agile development environment, one that's actually equipped to keep up with the rapid pace of change in the healthcare IT world.
But let's be realistic. The DoD is a massive organization. It's not exactly known for being nimble and quick on its feet.
You're telling me?
Yeah.
But they actually seem to recognize that. They talk about starting with what they call DevSecOps Lite.
DevSecOps Lite, huh? What's that all about?
So a full-blown DevSecOps implementation, which integrates development, security, and operations throughout the entire software lifecycle, that requires a huge cultural shift and a lot of expertise. They're acknowledging they might not be there yet.
So DevSecOps Lite is like dipping their toes in the water, taking strategic steps without trying to boil the ocean all at once.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. They're being realistic about their capabilities and taking a phased approach.
Smart move. It's all about laying the foundation for a more agile and responsive approach to healthcare IT development. Now, one thing that really jumps out at me from these documents is how they're going to organize all this new talent they want to bring in.
Yeah, that's a big question. Should they group developers by technical stack, by their specific specialty, or by the products they'll be working on? They're really wrestling with how to structure this whole DevMac ecosystem.
I bet. Each approach has its own set of trade-offs. It's a classic organizational dilemma.
So let's break those options down a bit. What are the pros and cons of each?
Okay, well, if you organize by stack, you're grouping people with similar technical skills. Front-end developers, back-end developers, database specialists, and so on. This can be really efficient for certain tasks.
Right, you've got everyone with the same expertise working together.
But it can also create silos, make it harder to integrate different parts of a system.
And what about organizing by specialty?
Well, with specialty, you're tapping into very specific skills. You might have cybersecurity experts, mobile app developers, data visualization gurus, but then you run the risk of fragmentation.
So you could have a bunch of experts working in isolation, not really talking to each other or sharing knowledge.
Precisely. And then there's the product approach, where you organize developers around specific projects or systems. This can foster a strong sense of ownership and accountability.
But again, you could end up with duplication of effort if different product teams aren't communicating effectively.
Exactly. It's a real balancing act, trying to maximize collaboration and innovation while minimizing risk. And to their credit, the documents show that the DoD is very aware of this challenge.
They're actively seeking input from industry experts on how to best structure this new ecosystem. Which brings us to the first program that will actually be using this DevMac approach, the Enterprise Intelligence and Data Solutions Program, or EIDS.
Yes, EIDS. This is where we really start to see the scale of the data challenges the DoD is up against.
Right, EIDS is responsible for managing a truly massive amount of data. everything from biobanks and patient portals to complex analytics platforms. It's a huge undertaking.
And to handle all of this data, they've developed the Medical Information Platform, or MIP.
The MIP, okay, tell us more about that.
Think of it as the central hub for all of this healthcare data. It's a powerful data engine that brings together information from all these different sources, makes it accessible and hopefully useful.
So it's kind of like taking all this raw data and turning it into something actionable.
That's the goal. And within EADS, there are two specific systems that are going to be early adopters of the DevMAC approach. The Military Health System, Population Health Portal, MHSPXP, and the Clinical Assessment Management Portal, or CANT-MP.
Those are quite a mouthful. Break those down for us.
Sure. So MHSPHP is used by healthcare teams across all branches of the military to manage, well, population health, tracking patient outcomes, identifying trends, developing interventions. It's about improving the overall health of military personnel and their families.
So it's like a command center for preventative care and proactive health management.
Exactly. And then there's CMP, which focuses on clinical assessments and patient questionnaires. This is really critical for managing things like traumatic brain injury or TBI. Healthcare providers can track symptoms, assess progress, tailor treatment plans.
Both of these systems, they sound like they have the potential to make a real difference in the lives of military personnel and their families.
They absolutely do. And the DoD is hoping that by bringing in this wider range of talent through the DevMAC, they can make these systems even better, more effective, and easier to use.
It's a huge challenge, but also a tremendous opportunity. One thing that I find really encouraging as we go through these documents is just how open the DoD is being about this whole process.
You mean like how they're actively seeking feedback from industry experts on everything from pricing strategies to evaluation criteria?
Yeah, they're even asking for feedback on how to structure the DevMAC contract itself. It's like they're saying, we know this is a big undertaking and we need your help to get it right.
It's refreshing to see that kind of transparency and willingness to collaborate. They recognize they don't have all the answers, and they're not afraid to ask for help.
It's almost like they're crowdsourcing innovation for a problem as complex as modernizing their entire healthcare IT infrastructure.
Exactly. And that's one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole DevMAC reboot. The idea of creating a space where the government and the private sector can work together to solve some of the most challenging problems in military healthcare.
It's a bold move, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Absolutely. It has the potential to be a real game changer, but as we've been discussing, there are a lot of potential pitfalls and challenges ahead as well.
There are. And in part 2 of our deep dive, we'll explore those challenges in more detail, looking at the risks, the obstacles, the things the DoD will need to navigate to make this ambitious plan a reality.
You know, one of the biggest challenges they're going to face has nothing to do with technology.
Interesting. What do you mean?
Well, it's the human element.
Ah, right. People and processes.
Exactly. Think about it. The DoD, it's a massive organization, right? Lots of moving parts. And it's not exactly known for being, super agile and quick to adapt.
That's for sure. Change is never easy, especially in a large, established organization like the DoD. And we're not just talking about swapping out some software here. This is a major cultural shift they're trying to pull off.
Right. And it's not just about technology, it's about mindsets. They're talking about agile development, DevSecOps, all these concepts that require a fundamentally different way of thinking about collaboration, communication, decision-making.
And that's a huge challenge for an organization that's used to, a more traditional top-down approach.
It is. They're trying to move away from that waterfall method where everything is planned out in advance and executed in a rigid sequence to something much more iterative, responsive. It's a big ask.
Yeah, it's almost like they're trying to rebuild the engine while the plane is still in flight.
That's a great analogy. They have to figure out how to make all these new parts fit together seamlessly, ensure a smooth transition, and, not crash the plane while they're doing it.
Right. Because people's lives are literally at stake here. This is healthcare we're talking about.
Exactly. It's high stakes. And then you layer on top of that the challenge of managing all this new talent they want to bring in. It's one thing to attract a bunch of developers with all these diverse backgrounds and skills.
Right. But how do you actually integrate them into the existing workforce? How do you make sure everyone's working together effectively and moving towards the same goals?
That's the million-dollar question. Because they're essentially creating a hybrid workforce, blending government employees who know the ins and outs of the DoD with these new contractors who bring fresh perspectives and specialized skills.
Like mixing oil and water. It can be done, but it takes a lot of care and finesse.
You got it. And clear communication is essential. Well-defined roles and responsibilities. And critically, everyone needs to understand the overall vision for this new approach. If people feel like change is being forced on them, it's not going to work.
Yeah, buy-in at all levels is absolutely crucial. But there's another big challenge we haven't really talked about yet.
You mean security?
Security, exactly. I mean, this is the Department of Defense. We're talking about highly sensitive healthcare data. How do they make sure this new DevM ecosystem is secure from the ground up?
Well, to their credit, they do seem to be taking security very seriously. The documents we've seen, they emphasize cybersecurity throughout. They even mention something called a concierge security service that'll be part of their DevX platform.
Concierge security, that's an interesting term. What does that actually entail?
I think it suggests a more proactive, supportive approach to security. Instead of just giving developers a big stack of regulations and saying, figure it out, they'll actually provide resources and guidance.
So it's like having a security expert on call, helping developers build secure solutions from the very beginning.
That's the idea. It's more holistic, recognizing that security is not just about technology. It's about culture, awareness, and giving developers the support they need.
And they're also talking about leveraging automation, especially for things like code scanning and vulnerability testing, trying to catch security issues early on before they become big problems.
Right. It's a shift from being reactive to proactive. But even with the best technology and processes in place, there's always the human element to consider.
Oh, absolutely. People make mistakes, and those mistakes can have big consequences when it comes to cybersecurity. So what are they doing to address the need for security awareness and training, especially among these new developers?
Well, honestly, the documents aren't super specific about that, but you'd hope that security training would be a core component of the onboarding process.
Right. It can't just be a one-time thing either. They need ongoing programs to keep everyone updated on the latest threats and best practices.
You're absolutely right. The cybersecurity landscape is constantly changing. They need to be constantly learning and adapting.
So we've talked a lot about the challenges, the potential pitfalls, the things that could go wrong. But we should also acknowledge the potential benefits of this initiative.
Oh, for sure. If the DoD can pull this off, if they can truly modernize their approach to healthcare IT, the impact could be enormous. Not just for the DoD, but for the entire military healthcare system.
Paint a picture for us.
Yeah.
What could this look like in a best-case scenario?
Well, imagine a system where all the different parts of the military healthcare ecosystem are seamlessly connected. Healthcare providers have real-time access to patient records, no matter where they are, which military branch they belong to. They've got advanced analytics and decision support tools at their fingertips, helping them diagnose and treat patients more effectively.
It sounds like it could revolutionize the coordination and efficiency of care.
That's the goal. Shorter wait times, fewer medical errors, better management of chronic conditions. The potential is huge.
It really is.
Yeah.
But as we've discussed, there's a long and challenging road ahead. Success is far from guaranteed.
Absolutely. It's a risky endeavor, but what's encouraging is that they seem to be going into this with a healthy dose of realism. They're not pretending to have all the answers, and they're actively seeking input from people who have experience with these kinds of large-scale IT modernization projects.
And that openness to collaboration, that willingness to challenge the status quo, that's maybe the most promising aspect of this whole thing.
I agree. It's a potential turning point in how the government approaches IT modernization. They're embracing new ideas, experimenting with different approaches, and acknowledging that they can't do it alone.
And that brings us back to the idea of industry feedback, which we talked about earlier. It seems to be a really central part of their strategy.
It is. They're essentially crowdsourcing innovation, tapping into a much wider pool of talent and expertise than they could ever hope to assemble in-house.
And they're not just looking for vendors to fulfill specific requirements. They're looking for partners, collaborators who can bring fresh ideas and innovative solutions to the table.
Right. They're being very specific about the kind of feedback they want, too. The documents, they're full of detailed questions for industry experts.
So they're not just saying, hey, give us your thoughts. They're really trying to understand the nuances of building this kind of collaborative ecosystem.
They are, and it's encouraging to see that they're even asking for feedback on things like pricing strategies and intellectual property rights. Those are often tricky issues in government contracting, but by addressing them up front, they're showing that they're willing to be flexible and find solutions that work for everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely a departure from the old way of doing things, where the government basically dictated the terms and everyone else just had to fall in line.
It is. It seems like they're trying to create a much more agile and collaborative environment. one where risk is embraced and failure is seen as a learning opportunity.
It's a bold experiment. And honestly, it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out. If it works, it could be a model for other government IT projects, not just in healthcare, but across the board.
Imagine that. This kind of collaborative, ecosystem-driven approach could be applied to everything from modernizing infrastructure to developing new educational technologies. It could fundamentally change how the government approaches technology and innovation.
It's an exciting prospect, but it all hinges on whether the DoD can actually pull this off. It's a complex undertaking with a lot of moving parts and a lot of potential for things to go wrong.
No doubt about it. But the potential rewards are huge. And the fact that they're approaching this with such transparency and a willingness to learn, well, that gives me a reason to be cautiously optimistic.
Me too.
Yeah.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want to shift gears a bit and really focus on this idea of industry feedback. What does it mean for the future of military healthcare? And maybe even government IT as a whole? That's what we'll be exploring next. So we've talked a lot about the DoD seeking this feedback from industry experts, and it's fascinating. It's a really key part of this whole DevMAC reboot.
It is pretty different from how the government usually handles these big IT projects, it's true.
Yeah, instead of just saying, here's what we want, build it, they're kind of saying, we need help figuring this out, which is
Refreshing.
It is. It is. And they're asking really specific questions, too, like how to structure the DevNAC contract, how to know if the developers are doing a good job, stuff like that.
Yeah, and they're not shying away from the tough stuff either, like pricing and intellectual property, things that can get pretty messy.
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely doing their homework and trying to understand how to build this whole collaborative thing the right way.
Huh. It's a much more mature approach, it feels like. Recognizing that the best solution comes when everyone's at the table, not just the government calling all the shots.
Right, exactly. It's like they're finally seeing industry not just as vendors, but as actual partners.
Partners, yeah, I like that. And for too long, government IT has been so risk averse, Lots of bureaucracy, not a lot of room for trying new things.
This does feel different, like they're actually trying to break out of that mold and get innovative.
It makes you wonder, if this works, could this be a model for other parts of the government too? Not just healthcare, but everything.
It's a really interesting thought, right? I mean, imagine if this approach was used for infrastructure projects, education, you name it. It could totally change how the government uses tech to solve problems.
Absolutely. But of course, we got to be real. It's not a guaranteed success, this DevMAC reboot.
Yeah, there are a ton of challenges. Like we talked about, working within the DoD is not easy. It's a huge system. And bringing all these new people in, making sure everyone's working together, it's a lot to manage.
Plus, let's not forget security. That's got to be top priority.
Absolutely. You can't mess around with healthcare data, especially in the DoD.
No kidding. But, even with all that, reading through these documents, there is a sense of optimism, I guess I'd say.
I feel it too. It really does feel like they want to do this the right way, to try something new, and they're not afraid to ask for help.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so exciting. This could really change how the DoD does healthcare IT. No more clunky, outdated systems, just a modern, agile approach.
And who knows, maybe it'll even be a model for the rest of the government too. So, to wrap things up for our listeners, I think the big question is this. What do you think? Is this going to work? What are the biggest roadblocks? What could this mean for the future of military healthcare and beyond? It's a really complex story, and it's just getting started, so thanks for joining us as we take this deep dive.